Are you tired of losing to these typical metamanting sweats whose builds you feel you have no chance against? Well, you're not, my friends, for I, Spiders, a top Deepwoken player, have found 5 underrated monsters that you can use to win as many fights as possible. Let's get into it. Now the first underrated mantra, and one that I very rarely see used these days, is Lightning Beam. Now Lightning Beam was pretty mediocre throughout most of history, but after a balance change on March 8 of 2024, Lightning Beam got a really big wind-up reduction. But since there were no numbers in the patch notes, people didn't really realize how big this reduction was. So after that balance change, Lightning Beam became a very quick mantra and one that is really hard to react to. And that is what I'd say its main strong point is. Besides that, it's also pretty long range, so you can use it in a lot of different situations. Overall, definitely a pretty solid mantra, and one that you should try out if you have extra space on your lightning builds. Now the next mantra that I'd like to talk about, and one that is for Shadow specifically, is Shadow Meteors. Now again, this definitely is not one of the flashiest Shadow mantras, but I would say that it's very underrated because for one, it has very high pressure. This is because you can aim it, so you can choose whether or not each individual meteor will hit, which is quite hard to get used to. And by combining this with M1s, it can be really unpredictable between when and when you're not going to hit your opponent with something, which pressures your opponent into blocking a lot of the time. From there, you can pretty much guarantee high posture damage, or even get some hits on your opponent if their defense is weak. Besides that, Shadow Meteors also has pretty good ether region when the meteors actually do hit, and also pretty solid damage as well. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty high potential mantra, and if you get really good with it, you can definitely put on a lot of pressure on your opponent with it. So Shadow Meteors is definitely a mantra that I consider on your Shadow builds. Now the next mantra I'd like to mention is a garbage mantra that I hardly ever see used really outside of top chime is Lightning Impact. Now some people have been catching on to the garbage meta and have been using this, but I'd say the majority of the player base hasn't caught on yet. So yeah, Lightning Impact is really good because it gives Thunder 2 garbage options instead of just one with Thunder Kick. And that is a really powerful ability. Not only that, but Lightning Impact has some very good tech with it, such as being able to slide it and not going into the air, which can be pretty hard to read if your opponent isn't used to it, or also using it with hit stun, because if you have one your opponent and then use Lightning Impact, if they miss their parry, they can't roll in time to dodge Lightning Impact, so it's basically guaranteed to hit in that situation. For that reason, Lightning Impact has very high potential in combos, and it's something that I really think should be seen more. That is why I think Lightning Impact is a very underrated mantra. Now next up, the mantra that I would definitely say is the most cheesy mantra on this list, and one that also comes with ice, is Ice Spikes. Now for Ice Spikes, I'm not talking about the base variant where you just like aim it on the ground somewhere, although actually some people do think that one's underrated too. But no, I'm talking about the Ice Traps variant, where you place the Ice Spikes on the ground and if your opponent walks over them, it procs the Ice Spike and does some decent damage. So by getting the Spike Traps talent and pressing F during when you're using Ice Spikes, you can place them on the ground instead, and they just kind of sit over here until your opponent walks over them. Now this might not sound that powerful, but these Ice Spikes on the ground last for a very long time, and you can start to stack them over the course of a fight. And once there becomes a lot of them, they can start to get really annoying to fight against. So yeah, you can just kind of stack them up, and there's really no counterplay for your opponent for this. You can block, parry, and dodge the spikes, but this is very punishable. For one, your opponent can attack you during this, which is really hard to pay attention to while you're trying to parry the spikes. And two, the benefit you get from parrying the spikes is posture damage to your opponent, but there are a lot of ways to counter this, especially since most people use the Cerulean Dagger with Ice Spikes. So you can just spam the crit, reduce your posture damage, and you're good. So really, Ice Spikes is a super free mantra. If you're willing to camp and just kind of sit on them, play annoying, then it is really powerful. Besides that, the last underrated mantra that I'll be talking about in this video, and one that I've been using a lot personally myself, is Wind Gun. Now Wind Gun is a Gale mantra that I really don't see much outside of top chime, but it has a lot of nice use cases. Now first, I recommend putting a blast spark on it because it makes it way easier to aim and much more consistent to use, and I believe it also does more damage as well. Past that, the mantra itself has a pretty reasonable windup and range, since most of the Gale mantras that have quick windup are really short range, or the ones that have long windup are long range as well. So I'd say Wind Gun is kind of a middle ground between medium windup and medium range, but it's definitely fast enough to be used in combos. And in combos it is really nice, because one, it ragdolls, which can be really helpful for extending, and two, it also suffocates, which can give you a variety of benefits, like some of the suffocate talents you can have. Overall though, I'd say this is a really solid Gale mantra, and if you have an extra mantra slot and you're not really sure what to put on it on a Gale build, then you can definitely check out Wind Gun. I'd say it's a pretty solid pick. Overall, these were 5 of what I consider to be the most underrated mantras in the game. Now, I will say by no means was this an exhaustive list, and if you think there are other underrated mantras worth mentioning, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I might do a part 2 in the next video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.